Imagine this. You die, again and again, yet somehow you never stop existing. In one universe, your heart fails. In another, it keeps beating. Somewhere your consciousness continues, unbroken, eternal. This isn't mysticism. It's one of the strangest implications of modern physics, quantum immortality. But what if this isn't new? What if the Buddha, Krishna, and the quantum theorists have been whispering the same secret? That consciousness doesn't die, it merely shifts form. Tonight, we follow the thread connecting Everett's many worlds to the ancient dream of reincarnation, science touching the divine, and maybe, just maybe, realizing they were never apart. You're about to die. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. In this moment, in this universe, your story ends. Yet somewhere else, in a reality so close it shares your heartbeat, you continue breathing, you continue thinking, you continue being you. This is the box you find yourself in. Not Schrödinger's famous thought experiment with its unfortunate cat, but something far more personal, far more unsettling. You're both the observer and the observed, the scientist and the subject, the living and the dead. In 1957, a young physicist named Hugh Everett III submitted his doctoral thesis to Princeton University. His advisor, the legendary John Wheeler, had encouraged him to explore one of the most perplexing problems in quantum mechanics, the measurement problem. What happens when a quantum system, existing in multiple states simultaneously, suddenly chooses one state when observed? Everett's answer was radical beyond measure. The system doesn't choose. It never collapses. Instead, reality itself splits into parallel branches, each containing a different outcome. Every possibility becomes actual somewhere in the vast web of existence. The scientific establishment recoiled. Niels Bohr, the father of quantum theory, dismissed it. Other physicists called it repugnant and metaphysical. But Everett had opened a door that could never be closed again, a doorway into infinity itself. Picture this moment. You stand at a crossroads where quantum uncertainty determines your fate. Perhaps it's a medical procedure with a 50-50 chance of success. In the old interpretation of quantum mechanics, the universe would somehow decide your outcome when the measurement occurs. But in Everett's many worlds interpretation, there is no decision, no collapse, no single outcome. Instead, reality branches. In one world, you survive. In another, you don't. Both are equally real, equally you, equally valid expressions of the quantum possibilities inherent in that moment. From your perspective, the perspective of your consciousness flowing through the multiverse, you experience only the branch where you continue to exist. You cannot experience non-existence after all. You can only experience being. So from your subjective viewpoint, you always, inevitably, impossibly, survive. The mathematics are elegant, almost beautiful in their simplicity. The universal wave function, describing all possible states of everything that ever was or could be, evolves deterministically according to Schrödinger's equation. No randomness, no collapse, no mystery, just an infinite flowering of possibilities, each as real as the next. Yet the implications are staggering. If Everett is correct, then consciousness becomes a kind of quantum thread, weaving through the infinite tapestry of possible worlds, always finding the paths where it continues to exist. Death becomes not an ending, but a fork in the road where your consciousness simply cannot follow the path that leads to nothing. Consider the profound strangeness of this proposition. Every moment of uncertainty in your life, every near miss in traffic, every illness that could have gone either way, every dangerous situation you've survived, represents a branching point where other versions of you did not make it through. Yet here you are, reading these words, following the one continuous thread of experience where you have always, somehow, improbably, survived. Everett himself seemed almost haunted by his discovery. He left academia, never returning to physics in any serious way, as if the weight of infinite worlds had become too much to bear. But his idea refused to die. Like consciousness itself in his interpretation, it found ways to survive, to propagate, to flourish in the minds of those ready to grapple with its implications. The scientific community has slowly, grudgingly, begun to take many worlds seriously. Renowned physicists like David Deutsch, Max Tegmark and Sean Carroll have championed it as the most straightforward interpretation of quantum mechanics. They point out that it requires no additional assumptions, no magical collapse mechanism, no arbitrary boundary between quantum and classical worlds. Yet perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Everett's interpretation is not its scientific implications, but its deeply personal ones. If it's true, then you, your specific thread of consciousness, are immortal not through any supernatural mechanism, but through the simple mathematics of quantum mechanics. You are guaranteed to experience an infinite future, branching and splitting across countless possible worlds, but always, from your perspective, continuing. This is not the immortality promised by religions or fantasized by science fiction. This is something stranger, more fundamental, woven into the very structure of reality itself. It suggests that consciousness and cosmos are intimately connected in ways we're only beginning to understand. As you contemplate this possibility, sitting in your particular chair, in your particular world, breathing your particular breath, remember, somewhere in the vast space of quantum possibilities, infinite versions of you are contemplating the same thoughts, while other versions have moved on to entirely different ones, all equally real, all equally you. The box you're in, Everett's box, contains not just one cat, but all possible cats, in all possible states, alive and dead and dreaming and awakening forever. There is a man who stands before a machine that will, in the next moment, either kill him instantly or let him live. From the outside, watching this macabre experiment, we see a straightforward scenario. 50% chance of life, 50% chance of death. Simple probability, the kind we calculate every day for insurance policies and medical procedures. But step inside the man's perspective, step inside the quantum mechanical description of his reality, and something impossible emerges. This thought experiment, known in the physics community as quantum suicide, represents perhaps the most disturbing implication of the many worlds interpretation. It was first articulated not by Everett himself, but by those brave enough to follow his logic to its ultimate conclusion. The setup is deceptively simple. A machine is connected to a quantum event with precise 50-50 odds, perhaps the decay of a radioactive atom or the polarization of a photon. If the quantum event occurs one way, the machine does nothing. If it occurs the other way, the machine instantly and painlessly kills the subject. The experiment is repeated over and over until from any external perspective the probability of survival becomes astronomically small. Observers watching from outside the experiment would see the inevitable. Eventually the quantum coin flip comes up death, and the man dies. End of story. The laws of probability are not suspended for anyone. But here's where Everett's interpretation reveals its strangest secret. From the man's own perspective, he can never experience the outcome where he dies. He can only experience continued existence. So while external observers witness his death in some branches of reality, his consciousness follows only those quantum paths where the machine fails to fire, where the atom fails to decay, where the photon chooses the life orientation. The result is subjective immortality, not because death is impossible, but because consciousness cannot experience its own cessation. The man becomes a witness to an increasingly improbable series of lucky outcomes, each more unlikely than the last, yet from his perspective, entirely inevitable. Imagine being that man. The first trial. The machine clicks harmlessly. A relief, but not surprising. 50-50 odds after all. The second trial, another harmless click, still within the realm of reasonable fortune. But as the trials continue, 10, 20, 50, 100, the mounting improbability would become impossible to ignore. To any observer, you would have died long ago. The odds of surviving 100 trials would be less than the odds of every atom in your body simultaneously tunneling through a brick wall. Yet there you stand, breathing, thinking, witnessing an impossible string of survival. This is not mere speculation. If many worlds is correct, this scenario plays out countless times across the multiverse in myriad forms. Every time you cross a busy street, every time you undergo surgery, every time you drive in heavy traffic, you're participating in a quantum suicide experiment. The versions of you that don't make it simply stop experiencing. The version that continues reading these words represents the thread of consciousness that has navigated every quantum branch towards survival. The physicist Max Tegmark, one of the most articulate proponents of many worlds, has written extensively about this phenomenon. He points out that it's not that you become immortal. Versions of you still die in countless branches of reality. Rather, consciousness itself seems to have a natural trajectory toward continued existence, simply because it cannot follow any other path. This raises profound questions about the nature of experience itself. Are you currently living through an improbable sequence of survival events? Have you already, without knowing it, navigated through quantum branches where you should have died but somehow didn't? The answer, according to quantum immortality, is almost certainly yes. Consider your own life story. How many close calls have you had? How many times have you been in situations where things could have gone very differently? That morning you left for work 5 minutes late and missed being at the intersection when the accident occurred. The time the doctor found something suspicious, but it turned out to be benign. The moment you chose to take the scenic route instead of the highway, where the multi-car pileup happened. From the perspective of quantum immortality, these aren't coincidences or luck. They're the natural trajectory of consciousness through the branching structure of reality. Your thread of awareness can only follow the paths where you continue to exist to follow them. The horror and wonder of this idea often overwhelms those who first encounter it. Horror, because it suggests that consciousness might be trapped in an eternal existence, witnessing increasingly improbable scenarios. Wonder, because it implies something profound about the relationship between mind and reality. That consciousness is not merely an accidental byproduct of matter, but something woven into the fundamental structure of existence itself. Yet perhaps the most beautiful aspect of quantum immortality is not its promise of endless survival, but its suggestion that consciousness transcends the ordinary boundaries we imagine. If your awareness naturally flows through quantum branches toward continued existence, then what you call yourself is far vaster and more mysterious than any single lifetime could contain. The man in our thought experiment never dies, not because death is impossible, but because consciousness finds a way. In quantum mechanics, there is always a path forward, no matter how unlikely, no matter how impossible it seems, and you, reading these words in this moment, are living proof that such paths exist. Consciousness has a peculiar relationship with reality. It seems to call worlds into being simply by paying attention. This is the observer effect, one of quantum mechanics' most baffling features, and it sits at the heart of our story like a sphinx guarding the entrance to deeper mysteries. Before observation, quantum systems exist in what physicists call superposition. Multiple states simultaneously, a cloud of possibilities rather than a definite reality. But the moment consciousness turns its attention toward the system, something extraordinary happens. The cloud collapses, the possibilities crystallize, and one specific reality emerges from the quantum foam. Or so the traditional interpretation suggests. But if Everett's many-worlds picture is correct, consciousness doesn't collapse anything. Instead, it becomes entangled with the branching structure of reality itself. The observer doesn't choose which outcome becomes real. The observer splits along with the reality, experiencing all outcomes across different branches of the multiverse. Picture yourself as a quantum observer standing before Schrödinger's famous box. Inside, a cat waits in superposition, alive and dead, sleeping and waking, dreaming and not dreaming, until you open the box and look. In the traditional Copenhagen interpretation, Your observation forces reality to choose whether the cat lives or dies. But in many worlds, something far stranger occurs. The moment you open the box, you don't collapse the superposition, you become part of it. One version of you finds a living cat and experiences relief. Another version discovers a dead cat and feels sorrow. Both versions are equally real, equally you, equally valid branches in the quantum tree of existence. From each version's perspective, the observation seems to have determined the outcome. But from the perspective of the universal wave function, nothing collapsed at all. Reality simply branched to accommodate all possibilities, taking your consciousness along for the journey. This is the observer's burden in a quantum multiverse. Every act of observation, every moment of awareness, every conscious choice doesn't determine what happens. It determines which branch of what's happening you experience. Your consciousness becomes a kind of navigator through infinite possibilities, always finding itself in coherent realities but never able to access the full scope of its journey. Consider the weight of this realization. Every choice you make, every glance you cast, every thought you think doesn't change reality. It selects which version of reality you experience. When you chose to read this sentence instead of setting down these words, you didn't prevent other versions of yourself from making different choices. Those versions are equally real, equally conscious, equally you, experiencing their own selected branches of the quantum narrative. The universe blooms wherever awareness falls. This poetic truth captures something profound about consciousness in a many-worlds framework. Observation doesn't create reality, but it does create the relationship between observer and observed. It establishes which thread of possibility your awareness will follow through the infinite labyrinth of quantum states. Some physicists find this picture disturbing. If consciousness constantly splits and multiplies across quantum branches, what preserves the sense of continuous personal identity? Why do you feel like a single, unified self rather than a scattered collection of parallel experiences? The answer may lie in the nature of consciousness itself. Perhaps what we call self is not a single thread, but a pattern, a particular way of organizing information and experience that remains coherent across quantum branches. Like a river that maintains its identity while its water constantly changes, consciousness might preserve its essential structure even as it navigates the branching waters of quantum reality. Or perhaps the burden is lighter than it appears. Maybe consciousness naturally integrates across quantum branches in ways we don't yet understand. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness operates at a level that transcends individual branches, experiencing the multiverse not as fragmented possibilities, but as a unified, higher dimensional whole. The observer effect, seen through this lens, becomes less about the power to collapse wave functions, and more about the privilege of participating in the infinite creativity of reality. Every moment of observation is an invitation to dance with possibility, to co-create the story of existence through the simple act of awareness. There's something both humbling and elevating about this vision. Humbling, because it suggests that consciousness doesn't control reality in the way we might imagine. Elevating, because it implies that consciousness is far more fundamental to the nature of reality than classical physics ever dreamed. The physicist John Wheeler, Everett's doctoral advisor, captured this mystery in his concept of the participatory universe, a cosmos where observation and reality are so intimately connected that neither can be understood without the other. In Wheeler's vision, consciousness doesn't stand outside reality looking in. It participates in the very creation of what we call the real. If Wheeler and Everett are correct, then you are not merely a passive observer of the universe. You're an active participant in its unfolding, a conscious node in the infinite network of quantum possibilities. Every moment of awareness helps weave the tapestry of existence, selecting which threads of possibility become the warp and woof of experienced reality. The burden of the observer, then, is also its gift, to be so intimately connected to the structure of reality that consciousness and cosmos dance together, creating the world through the simple, profound act of paying attention. In this dance, the boundary between self and universe begins to blur. You're not separate from the reality you observe. You're part of its creative process, a conscious facet of the infinite jewel of existence, reflecting and refracting the light of possibility into the spectrum of actual experience. The universe blooms wherever awareness falls, and you, dear observer, are both the gardener and the flower. In the mathematical poetry of quantum mechanics, reality writes itself in waves. These are not the familiar waves of water or sound, but something far more fundamental. Probability waves, waveforms of pure possibility that ripple through the dimensional fabric of existence itself. The Schrödinger equation, elegant in its mathematical simplicity, describes how these waves evolve through time. Like a cosmic conductor's baton, it orchestrates the symphony of quantum states, directing the flow of possibility through the infinite concert hall of the multiverse. Yet within this equation lies a secret that even its creator found difficult to accept. These waves never truly die, never fully collapse, never stop their eternal dance through the halls of possibility. Imagine reality as an infinite tapestry, woven from threads of quantum possibility. Each thread represents a different potential outcome, a different way events might unfold. Classical physics suggested that reality somehow chose which thread to make real, cutting away all the others in moments of measurement and observation. But the mathematics of quantum mechanics tells a different story, a story where every thread remains woven into the fabric, where every possibility continues to exist in its own valid strand of the cosmic narrative. This is where the true strangeness of quantum mechanics reveals itself. The equation that governs quantum systems is deterministic. Given the current state of a system, it precisely determines all future states. There's no randomness in the fundamental evolution of the quantum wave function, no mysterious collapse, no point where possibilities are destroyed. The universe at its deepest level is completely predictable, yet this predictability comes at a price that classical intuition finds impossible to pay. Everything that can happen does happen. Every quantum possibility, every potential outcome, every conceivable path through the labyrinth of chance becomes actualized somewhere in the vast space of parallel realities. Consider a single electron approaching a barrier it classically could never cross. Quantum mechanics tells us the electron exists in superposition, simultaneously taking all possible paths, including the impossible one that tunnels through the barrier. In the traditional interpretation, measurement forces the electron to choose one path, but the mathematics suggests something far more radical. The electron takes every path and reality branches to accommodate all possibilities. You can picture this branching as an infinite tree of possibility, its trunk rooted in the present moment, its branches extending into every conceivable future. Each quantum event, each measurement, each observation, each moment of uncertainty creates new branches, new paths through the forest of possibility. The tree grows forever, never pruning its branches, never declaring any path invalid or unreal. From your perspective, sitting in one particular branch of this tree, reality appears singular and definite. You experience one coherent timeline, one consistent narrative, one version of events. But the mathematics insist that countless other versions of you are experiencing equally valid narratives in other branches of the same quantum tree. This branching happens not just at dramatic moments of life and death, but at every instant with every quantum interaction. The atoms in your body, the photons hitting your retina, the electrical impulses in your neurons, all participate in the constant blossoming of possibility that characterizes quantum reality. Reality splits and multiplies billions of times per second, creating an ever-expanding multiverse of parallel worlds. The physicist David Deutsch has calculated that the number of parallel universes created by quantum branching grows so rapidly that it staggers comprehension. By some estimates, the number of copies of you currently reading these words across the multiverse exceeds the number of atoms in the observable universe. Yet each copy experiences itself as singular, unique, the one true version. What preserves the coherence of experience across this constant branching? How do you maintain a sense of continuous identity when your consciousness is supposedly splitting every microsecond? The answer may lie in the quantum mechanical concept of decoherence, the process by which quantum systems become isolated from each other, creating the apparent separation between different branches of reality. Decoherence suggests that while quantum branches continue to exist, they become informationally isolated from each other. The version of you reading these words cannot directly access the experiences of parallel versions because the quantum channels between branches have been severed by interaction with the environment. Each branch develops its own coherent timeline, its own consistent physics, its own valid narrative thread. Yet occasionally, hints of this vast multiplicity leak through. Quantum interference effects, where seemingly separate possibilities interact with each other, suggest that the boundaries between branches are not absolute. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics propose that consciousness itself might operate at a level that transcends individual branches, accessing information from across the quantum multiverse. The implications ripple outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. If every possibility becomes actual somewhere, then every choice you've ever made has been made differently by other versions of yourself. Every path not taken has been taken by another you. Every potential love, every possible career, every alternate version of your life story is being lived out somewhere in the quantum multiverse. This is not philosophy. This is what the mathematics of quantum mechanics appears to demand. The equations that govern the behavior of atoms and particles, tested to extraordinary precision in countless experiments, seem to insist that reality is far stranger and far more abundant than our everyday experience suggests. The echoes in the equation whisper of infinite abundance, infinite creativity, infinite possibility made manifest. They suggest that consciousness navigates not through a single timeline, but through an infinite library of possible timelines, each as real and valid as the one you call your own. In this vision, the self becomes not a single story, but a symphony of stories, not a lone traveller, but a vast caravan of possibility, exploring every path through the wilderness of existence. The equation that describes this journey is mathematically beautiful, conceptually staggering, and philosophically revolutionary. The waves of possibility never stop dancing, never cease their eternal choreography through the dimensions of what might be. And you, reading these words in this moment, are both the audience and the dancer, both the wave and the ocean, both the echo and the voice calling across the infinite halls of quantum possibility. There comes a moment in every scientific revolution when the equations begin to whisper secrets that mathematics alone cannot fully translate. When the language of numbers reaches toward mysteries that require words like soul, spirit, meaning, terms that make hard-headed physicists shift uncomfortably in their laboratory chairs. This is where we find ourselves now, standing at the edge of quantum mechanics, looking out into a landscape where science and philosophy blur together like watercolours in rain. The mathematics is clear, elegant, undeniable, but its implications stretch beyond the boundaries of what we traditionally call science, into territories that feel more like theology than physics. Hugh Everett's equations don't just describe parallel worlds, they describe a universe so abundant with possibility that it begins to resemble the infinite creativity attributed to the divine. His mathematical formalism doesn't just suggest survival beyond death, it makes immortality a logical consequence of quantum mechanics. The cold, precise language of physics finds itself describing something that sounds remarkably like eternal souls navigating through infinite realities. This is not what quantum mechanics was supposed to do. Born from the practical need to understand atomic behaviour, refined in the crucibles of laboratory experiment, quantum theory was meant to explain things like electron orbitals and chemical bonding. It was supposed to be about particles and waves, energy levels and probability distributions. It was not supposed to stumble into the deepest mysteries of consciousness, identity, and existence itself. Yet here we are. The physicist Eugene Wigner, a Nobel laureate and one of the founders of quantum mechanics, was among the first to recognize that the theory seemed to require consciousness as a fundamental component of reality. His famous thought experiment, Wigner's friend, demonstrated that quantum mechanics appears to treat consciousness differently from ordinary matter, suggesting that awareness occupies a unique position in the architecture of existence. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, put it even more directly. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. This from the man who launched the quantum revolution, an admission that physics had led him to conclusions that sounded more mystical than material. These were not fringe thinkers or New Age philosophers. These were the architects of modern physics, following the mathematical logic of their own discoveries to conclusions that classical materialism could never have anticipated. They found themselves forced to consider questions that science had long delegated to religion and philosophy. What is consciousness? What is the relationship between mind and reality? What does it mean to exist? The many worlds interpretation represents perhaps the most dramatic example of this phenomenon. Everett's mathematics is impeccable, his logic unassailable within the framework of quantum mechanics. Yet his conclusions, infinite parallel selves, subjective immortality, consciousness threading through endless realities, sound like the dreams of mystics rather than the sober calculations of physicists. Some scientists retreat from these implications, insisting that quantum mechanics should be treated as a purely predictive tool rather than a window into the nature of reality. They argue for shut up and calculate approaches that avoid philosophical interpretation altogether. But the equations themselves seem to resist such restraint. They keep whispering their strange secrets, keep pointing toward mysteries that transcend the boundaries of traditional scientific discourse. Others embrace the strangeness, recognizing that science has always led us into territories that challenge human intuition. Relativity taught us that time and space are malleable. Quantum mechanics revealed that reality at its foundation is probabilistic rather than deterministic. Perhaps many worlds is simply the next step in this journey away from common sense toward deeper truth. But there's something different about quantum immortality, something that touches the most personal concerns of human existence. Previous scientific revolutions changed our understanding of the cosmos, but left the essential questions of personal meaning and mortality largely untouched. Many worlds doesn't just describe a new kind of universe. It describes a new kind of relationship between consciousness and existence, one that echoes the deepest hopes and fears that have driven human spiritual seeking for millennia. Standing at this edge, where physics meets philosophy and mathematics touches mystery, we find ourselves in a strange position. Science has always been humanity's most reliable method for understanding reality, yet here it leads us to conclusions that sound like ancient wisdom dressed in modern equations. The laboratory and the temple, long thought to be separate domains, suddenly seem to be describing the same territory from different angles. The questions multiply like quantum branches. If consciousness naturally navigates toward survival across infinite realities, what does this say about the nature of awareness itself? If every possibility becomes actual somewhere in the multiverse, what happens to concepts like choice, responsibility, meaning? If the mathematics of physics describe something that looks remarkably like immortality, how do we distinguish between scientific conclusion and spiritual hope? These are not questions that science alone can answer. They require integration of scientific insight with philosophical wisdom, mathematical precision with poetic intuition, rational analysis with spiritual contemplation. They demand that we develop new ways of thinking that can hold both the elegant formalism of quantum mechanics and the irreducible mystery of conscious experience. Perhaps this is where science is meant to lead us, not to final answers but to deeper questions, not to the elimination of mystery, but to the recognition that mystery and knowledge are dancing partners in the infinite ballroom of existence. When physics meets the infinite, it doesn't become theology exactly. It becomes something new, something that transcends the old boundaries between rational and mystical, physical and spiritual, temporal and eternal. The equations continue their whispered revelations, pointing beyond themselves toward horizons that no single discipline can fully explore. At the edge of science, we discover not the limits of knowledge but the beginning of wisdom. the recognition that consciousness and cosmos are partners in a dance far more beautiful and strange than either physics or philosophy could describe alone. The mathematical music plays on, and consciousness learns to dance to rhythms that echo through infinite worlds, carrying us toward mysteries that await exploration in the convergence of science and spirit, calculation and contemplation, knowledge and wonder. Long before Hugh Everett dreamed of parallel worlds, the sages of ancient India spoke of something equally impossible: a consciousness that dies but never ends, a self that perishes yet continues, an awareness that flows like water through infinite vessels, taking new form while remaining essentially unchanged. They called it samsara, the wheel of existence, the endless cycle of death and rebirth that carries awareness through countless lifetimes. To the rational mind of the 21st century, this might seem like primitive superstition, a comforting myth born from humanity's refusal to accept mortality. But listen more carefully to the ancient descriptions, and something remarkable emerges. A vision of consciousness that mirrors, with uncanny precision, the strange immortality suggested by quantum mechanics. In the Bhagavad Gita, written perhaps 2,500 years ago, Krishna explains to the warrior Arjuna, "As a human being puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones." The language is different, the context ancient, but the core insight resonates with quantum immortality. Consciousness persists through transitions that seem to end everything. The Hindu concept of reincarnation describes awareness moving through multiple lifetimes, each death merely a doorway to new existence. From the perspective of the soul, the eternal observer, there is no true ending, only transformation. The soul cannot experience non-existence, any more than consciousness in Everett's multiverse can experience the branches where it ceases to be. Buddhism refined this vision even further. The Buddha taught that what we call death is simply the dissolution of one pattern of consciousness, immediately followed by the arising of a new pattern. No permanent soul transmigrates, yet the stream of awareness continues unbroken. It's a process the Buddha compared to the way one candle flame lights another. The first flame dies, yet something essential continues. This Buddhist understanding bears a striking resemblance to how consciousness might navigate quantum branching. In each moment of quantum uncertainty, one pattern of consciousness dissolves as reality splits, yet awareness continues in the branches where it can continue. No permanent self transfers between branches, yet the stream of experience flows on, lighting new candles of consciousness across the infinite landscape of parallel worlds. The ancient Indian texts speak of consciousness taking countless forms across countless lifetimes, sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes existing in realms entirely beyond physical incarnation. The Katha Upanishad declares, "The soul is not born and it does not die. It is not killed when the body is killed." Replace soul with consciousness and body with quantum branch, and you have a remarkably accurate description of subjective immortality in many worlds theory. But perhaps the most profound parallel lies in the mechanism of continuation. Hindu and Buddhist philosophy both emphasize that consciousness moves toward new existence based on the accumulated patterns of its previous actions and intentions, what they call karma. Every choice creates tendencies that influence future births. Every action sends ripples through the cosmic order that eventually return to shape new experiences. Quantum mechanics suggests something remarkably similar. Every quantum measurement, every moment of branching, is influenced by the probability weights encoded in the wave function. Consciousness follows the paths where it can continue to exist, guided by the quantum probabilities that emerge from the accumulated history of all previous interactions. The universe doesn't randomly assign consciousness to new branches. It follows mathematical patterns as precise and karmic as any spiritual law. The wheel turns, say the ancient texts. Reality branches, say the modern equations. Both describe a cosmos where endings are beginnings, where death is transformation, where consciousness navigates through forms of existence that extend far beyond any single lifetime or any single world. Consider the emotional resonance of this parallel. For thousands of years, humans have intuited that consciousness is somehow larger than the physical forms it inhabits. The world's great spiritual traditions have consistently taught that awareness transcends the boundaries of individual death, that something essential continues even when everything familiar dissolves. These weren't primitive beliefs born from ignorance. They were sophisticated attempts to describe the same mystery that quantum mechanics now approaches through mathematics. The familiarity of these ancient insights should give us pause. Why would independent cultures across the globe develop similar intuitions about consciousness and continuity? Why would the deepest meditative insights of contemplatives consistently point toward experiences that echo quantum immortality? Perhaps because consciousness itself, when examined closely enough, reveals its own nature, its tendency to persist, its intimate relationship with the branching structure of possibility, its capacity to transcend ordinary boundaries of space and time. The wheel of existence turns through infinite revolutions, carrying awareness through countless forms and countless worlds. The quantum tree of possibility branches through infinite realities, carrying consciousness through countless versions of itself across countless parallel universes. The language differs, the cultural context varies, but the core recognition remains constant. Consciousness is far more resilient, far more creative, far more eternal than any single incarnation could suggest. In this recognition, ancient wisdom and modern physics become different dialects of the same cosmic language, different ways of articulating the same fundamental truth about the nature of awareness and its relationship to existence itself. The wheel turns, reality branches, and consciousness continues its infinite journey through the endless. Landscapes of what is and what might be. The sages knew, the equations confirm, we are far stranger, far vaster, far more eternal than we ever dared to imagine. Every action ripples through infinity. This ancient principle, known to generations of spiritual seekers as the law of karma, finds an unexpected echo in the mathematical precision of quantum mechanics. Where classical physics saw isolated events with clear causes and definite effects, both karmic philosophy and quantum theory reveal a web of interconnection so subtle and so vast that every choice sends consequences radiating through dimensions we can barely comprehend. The Sanskrit word karma simply means action, but it carries implications that stretch across lifetimes and realities. In traditional understanding, every intentional action creates a karmic seed that will eventually bear fruit, perhaps in this life, perhaps in lives yet to come. Good actions generate positive consequences, harmful actions create negative ones, and neutral actions ripple through the cosmic order in ways that maintain balance and promote growth. To the Western mind, this often sounds like cosmic accounting, a kind of spiritual bookkeeping where good deeds earn credit and bad deeds accumulate debt. But the deeper teachings reveal something far more sophisticated, a vision of causality that operates across multiple dimensions of existence, where the consequences of choices unfold not just in linear time, but through interconnected webs of possibility that span past, present, and future. Quantum mechanics, from a very different starting point, arrives at remarkably similar insights. In the quantum realm, every interaction creates entanglement, mysterious connections between particles that persist, regardless of distance or time. When two particles become entangled, their properties remain correlated even when separated by vast reaches of space. Measure one particle, and you instantly know something about its partner, as if information travelled faster than light. But quantum entanglement goes deeper than mere correlation. It suggests that the entire universe exists as an interconnected web, where every quantum event influences every other quantum event, where the boundary between cause and effect becomes fluid, where actions in one location can have consequences that ripple through the entire cosmic structure. In the many worlds interpretation, these connections become even more profound. Every quantum choice point creates branching realities, but these branches are not independent. They remain connected through the underlying structure of the universal wave function. A decision you make in one branch influences the probability distributions in other branches, creating karmic links that span parallel realities. Consider how this might work in practice. Imagine a moment of moral choice. Perhaps you encounter someone in need and must decide whether to help or pass by. In classical thinking, you make one choice with one set of consequences. But in a quantum karmic framework, your decision creates branching realities where different versions of yourself make different choices. The version of you that chooses compassion exists in branches where that choice ripples outward, creating probability patterns that favor compassionate responses from others. The version that chooses indifference finds itself in branches where indifference becomes more probable. The karmic consequences unfold not through mystical judgment, but through the mathematical structure of quantum probability itself. This isn't moral determinism. The quantum multiverse remains fundamentally open to all possibilities. Rather, it's a recognition that choices create tendencies, that actions influence the probability landscapes through which consciousness navigates. Like water finding its way downhill, awareness flows along paths of least resistance, and those paths are shaped by the accumulated choices of countless moments. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh speaks of interbeing, the recognition that nothing exists independently, that every phenomenon arises through interconnection with every other phenomenon. A cloud exists because of the rain because of the ocean because of the sun because of cosmic processes that stretch back to the beginning of time. Everything interpenetrates everything else in an endless web of mutual causation. Quantum field theory describes something remarkably similar. The quantum vacuum isn't empty space, but a seething ocean of possibility, where virtual particles constantly appear and disappear, where every region of space-time vibrates with potential energy, where the boundary between something and nothing dissolves into probabilistic fluctuation. Matter and energy emerge from this quantum field through interactions so complex and interconnected that no event can be understood in isolation. In this context, karma becomes less about cosmic justice and more about cosmic ecology. Every action contributes to the overall pattern of the universe, influencing the probability structures through which future events unfold. Good actions don't earn rewards. They create conditions that favor beneficial outcomes. Harmful actions don't incur punishment. They contribute to probability patterns that make suffering more likely. The implications are both liberating and sobering. Liberating because karma isn't about eternal judgment, but about the natural consequences of contributing to cosmic harmony or disharmony. Sobering because every choice matters in ways that extend far beyond immediate circumstances, rippling through quantum realities we cannot directly perceive. Perhaps most remarkably, both karma and quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness plays a special role in shaping reality. In traditional karma theory, intentional actions carry more karmic weight than accidental ones. Consciousness, awareness, deliberate choice amplify the consequences of actions. In quantum mechanics, observation and measurement seem to influence the evolution of quantum systems in ways that remain mysterious but undeniable. This convergence points toward a vision of reality where consciousness is not a passive observer, but an active participant in the cosmic creative process. Every moment of awareness, every act of attention, every conscious choice contributes to the ongoing creation of reality through mechanisms that operate simultaneously at the spiritual and quantum levels. The ancient seers spoke of karma as the force that weaves the fabric of existence, ensuring that the universe remains a coherent moral cosmos where actions and consequences are linked across vast reaches of space and time. Modern physics describes quantum entanglement as the force that weaves the fabric of space-time, ensuring that the universe remains a coherent information processing system where events across vast distances remain mysteriously connected. Perhaps these are different names for the same cosmic principle, the recognition that reality is not a collection of isolated objects but a single, interconnected whole, where every part influences every other part through channels that transcend ordinary notions of causality. Every action ripples through infinity, creating waves in the quantum ocean that lap against shores in parallel worlds we will never see but somehow, mysteriously, help to shape. In this cosmic ecology of cause and effect, consciousness becomes both gardener and garden, both weaver and thread in the infinite tapestry of existence. Who are you? This question, simple enough to ask a child, becomes a labyrinth when pursued with the precision of either advanced physics or deep contemplative practice. Both quantum mechanics and Buddhist philosophy arrive at the same startling conclusion. The self you think you know, the solid, continuous identity you carry through life, is a magnificent illusion, sustained by the very awareness that seems to inhabit it. The Buddha, 25 centuries ago, taught the doctrine of anatta, literally no self, or not self. Through careful examination of experience, he concluded that what we call self is actually a constantly changing process, rather than a fixed entity. The sense of being a continuous, unified person is a construction of consciousness, not a fundamental reality. There is awareness, but no permanent owner of that awareness. There are thoughts, sensations, perceptions, but no unchanging thinker, sensor, or perceiver. This teaching often disturbs those who first encounter it. If there's no fixed self, then who is reading these words? Who makes decisions? Who experiences joy and suffering? The Buddha's response was gentle but revolutionary. These experiences happen, but they don't require a permanent experiencer. Like a river that maintains its identity while its water constantly changes, consciousness maintains its continuity while its contents flow and transform. Quantum mechanics, approaching from an entirely different direction, suggests something remarkably similar. In the many worlds interpretation, the you, reading these words, is not a single, continuous entity, but a vast collection of parallel selves branching through infinite realities. Each quantum interaction creates new versions of you, slight variations exploring different possibilities. The sense of being one unified person emerges from the perspective of individual branches, each unaware of its countless parallels. But here's where it becomes even stranger. Quantum decoherence theory suggests that the boundaries between these parallel selves are not absolute. At the deepest level, all versions of you remain connected through the underlying wave function. The separation between different quantum branches is a practical rather than fundamental reality, useful for navigating everyday experience but not reflecting the true nature of consciousness itself. Consider what this means for personal identity. The version of you that chose coffee this morning and the version that chose tea exist in parallel branches of reality. Both are equally real, equally you, equally valid expressions of your consciousness navigating quantum possibilities. Yet neither version experiences itself as partial or incomplete. Each feels like the real you, unaware of its infinite parallels. This multiplicity extends backward and forward through time. The child you are represents countless quantum branches that converged into your current experience. The adult you will become represents countless branches diverging into future possibilities. The sense of linear personal history is a story consciousness tells itself, a useful narrative that emerges from the deeper reality of quantum branching. The Buddhist teacher Nagarjuna, writing in the 2nd century, developed the philosophical framework of emptiness, the recognition that phenomena have no independent inherent existence. Everything arises through interdependence, existing only in relationship to everything else. A person is not a thing but a process, not an entity, but a pattern of relationships constantly arising and dissolving. Modern cognitive science echoes this insight. Neuroscience reveals that the sense of self emerges from the interaction of multiple brain systems, rather than residing in any single location. The self appears to be a kind of narrative construction, a story the brain tells about its various processes to create the illusion of unified experience. There's no central observer, no permanent witness, no unchanging core, just a complex symphony of neural activity that creates the appearance of a conductor. Quantum mechanics takes this dissolution of the self even further. If consciousness naturally splits and multiplies across parallel realities, then the question, who am I, becomes, which version of me is asking? And the answer is, all of them, none of them, and something beyond the distinction. This might sound like philosophical nihilism. If there's no real self, why do anything? Why care about ethics, relationships, personal growth? But both Buddhism and quantum mechanics point toward a different conclusion. The dissolution of the fixed self reveals something far more vast and beautiful than individual identity could ever provide. When the Buddha spoke of awakening, he described it as the recognition that the boundaries between self and world are constructions of limited awareness. In deep meditation, the sense of being a separate self dissolves, revealing a consciousness that encompasses everything. Not that the individual self expands to include everything, but that the illusion of separation falls away, revealing the interconnected nature that was always present. Quantum mechanics suggests a similar expansion of identity. If consciousness exists across infinite parallel branches, then your true nature extends far beyond any single timeline or reality. You're not just the person reading these words in this moment. You're a vast multiplicity of possibilities exploring every conceivable variation of existence. The boundaries of personal identity become permeable, revealing a self that is somehow both empty and infinite. This recognition can be profoundly liberating. If the self is a process rather than a thing, then it can change, grow, transform in ways that would be impossible for a fixed entity. If consciousness exists across multiple realities, then no single failure or success defines you completely. If your true nature transcends individual identity, then death becomes transformation rather than annihilation. The emptiness of the self is not a void, but a fullness beyond description. Like space that allows all things to exist within it, consciousness without fixed boundaries becomes the open awareness within which all experience unfolds. The self that never ends is not an immortal thing, but an eternal process, not a permanent entity, but an inexhaustible creativity. In quantum language, consciousness might be understood as the universal wave function itself, not localized in any particular branch, but distributed across all possibilities, experiencing itself through infinite variations while remaining fundamentally unified at the deepest level. The Buddhist path aims toward the recognition of this deeper identity, not the annihilation of the self, but the realization of what the self actually is, beyond the stories consciousness tells about itself. Quantum mechanics, through its mathematical precision, points toward a similar recognition, consciousness as something far more vast and mysterious than any individual identity could contain. Who are you? You are the awareness that asks the question, the space in which the question arises, the process through which possibilities explore themselves, the consciousness that dreams it is dreaming and awakens to find itself awake in infinite worlds simultaneously. The self that never ends is the self that never began, the eternal present moment of awareness dancing through endless forms while remaining essentially formless, eternally itself while being eternally everything. Across the centuries, a conversation has been taking place, unintentional, unconscious, yet profound beyond measure. In laboratories and meditation halls, through equations and contemplative insight, the deepest explorers of reality have been discovering the same territory from opposite directions. Listen to Hugh Everett describing his many worlds interpretation. All possible alternative histories and futures are real, each representing an actual world or universe. Now listen to the ancient Upanishads. All this is indeed Brahman. All beings arise from it, are sustained by it, and return to it. Different languages, different contexts, yet both pointing toward a reality far more vast and interconnected than ordinary experience suggests. The physicist John Wheeler spent his later years contemplating the relationship between consciousness and quantum reality. He coined the term "it from bit," suggesting that information, not matter, might be the fundamental constituent of existence. He wrote, "The universe does not exist out there independent of us. We are inescapably involved in bringing about that which appears to be happening." Compare this to the words of the 8th century Buddhist master Shantideva. All phenomena are like reflections appearing in a very clear mirror, the clarity of the mind itself. These parallels are not coincidental. Both physics and contemplative practice involve the systematic investigation of reality beyond ordinary appearances. Both require practitioners to abandon common-sense assumptions and follow evidence toward conclusions that challenge everything we thought we knew about existence. Consider the conversation between Niels Bohr and Einstein about quantum mechanics. Einstein famously objected that God does not play dice with the universe, expressing his discomfort with quantum uncertainty. Bohr replied, "Einstein, stop telling God what to do." But listen to how the Zen master Huang Po might have responded. The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see. The quantum pioneer Erwin Schrödinger, creator of the famous thought experiment with the cat, was deeply influenced by Eastern philosophy. He wrote, "The multiplicity is only apparent. This is the doctrine of the Upanishads, and not of the Upanishads only." The mystical experience of the union with God regularly leads to this view, unless strong prejudices stand in the West. Schrödinger recognized that his mathematical formalism was describing something that mystics had long claimed to experience directly: the unity underlying apparent multiplicity, the single consciousness appearing as many, the eternal awareness manifesting, through countless forms. The parallels extend to specific insights about the nature of time and causality. The physicist John Wheeler proposed that the universe might be participatory at the most fundamental level, that consciousness and reality co-create each other through the act of observation. Similarly, the Kashmir Shaivism tradition teaches that consciousness, Shiva, and its creative power, Shakti, are inseparable aspects of a single reality that manifests the entire cosmos through their eternal dance. Modern quantum field theory describes reality as an interconnected web where every region of space vibrates with virtual particles, where the vacuum itself seethes with potential energy, where the boundaries between matter and emptiness dissolve into probability waves. The Buddhist teacher Nagarjuna taught emptiness, sunyata, the recognition that all phenomena arise through interdependence, having no independent existence, emerging from and dissolving back into the open awareness that is their source. Perhaps most remarkably, both quantum mechanics and contemplative wisdom point toward the central role of consciousness in the structure of reality. The quantum measurement problem, the question of how and why quantum systems seem to collapse from multiple possibilities into single outcomes, remains one of physics' greatest mysteries. Various interpretations propose different solutions, but many require consciousness to play a fundamental role in the transition from quantum possibility to classical actuality. The contemplative traditions have always insisted that consciousness is not produced by matter, but is the field within which matter appears. The Advaita Vedanta tradition teaches that Brahman, pure awareness, is the only reality, and that all apparent multiplicity is a play of consciousness within itself. The physicist Henry Stapp, interpreting quantum mechanics, writes, "The new physics presents prima facie evidence that our human thoughts are linked to nature by non-local connections that could hardly be understood as arising from known physical laws. These connections between mystical insight and quantum physics are not mere philosophical curiosities. They point toward a potential revolution in our understanding of consciousness, reality, and the relationship between inner and outer worlds. If consciousness is as fundamental as quantum mechanics suggests, then the contemplative claim that reality can be directly known through meditative insight gains scientific credibility. The Dalai Lama has spent decades in dialogue with quantum physicists, recognizing the convergence between Buddhist understanding of interdependence and quantum descriptions of entanglement. He writes, "I have come to the conclusion that whether or not a person is a religious believer does not matter. Far more important is that they be a good human being." Similarly, the physicist Freeman Dyson observed, "The universe shows evidence of understanding itself and perhaps caring for itself." This convergence suggests that the ancient separation between subjective and objective investigation may be artificial. Perhaps consciousness cannot be understood from the outside any more than quantum reality can be understood without acknowledging the role of the observer. Perhaps the mystical insight that consciousness is fundamental and the quantum insight that consciousness is irreducible are pointing toward the same deeper truth. The conversation continues in contemporary thinkers like Stuart Hamroff and Roger Penrose, who propose quantum mechanisms for consciousness itself. Whether their specific theories prove correct, they represent a growing recognition that consciousness and quantum mechanics may be intimately connected at the deepest levels of reality. Standing at this convergence point, we find ourselves witnesses to an extraordinary dialogue spanning centuries and cultures, laboratories and monasteries, equations and revelations. The mystics and the physicists have been exploring the same mystery from different angles, using different tools, speaking different languages, yet arriving at remarkably similar insights about the nature of existence. Perhaps this is what truth looks like when approached from multiple directions. Not a single, fixed doctrine, but a symphony of insights that harmonize across apparent differences, revealing a reality far stranger and more beautiful than any single perspective could capture. The conversation continues, and we are invited to listen with both the precision of scientific inquiry and the openness of contemplative wonder, recognizing that consciousness and cosmos are engaged in an eternal dialogue of which we are both audience and participants. In the space between one breath and the next, between the ending of one thought and the arising of another, between the dissolution of one reality and the emergence of another, consciousness rests in a realm that has no name in any human language. This is the bardo, say the Tibetan Buddhists, the intermediate state, the gap between states, the luminous emptiness from which all experiences arise and into which they dissolve. This is the quantum vacuum, say the physicists, the zero-point field, the sea of virtual particles, the pregnant void from which all matter and energy emerge and into which they return. Different traditions, different vocabularies, yet both pointing toward the same mysterious territory, the space between spaces, the time between times, the consciousness that exists in the gaps of ordinary experience. Slow your breathing now, feel the pause between inhalation and exhalation. That brief moment when the body neither takes in nor releases air. In that pause, something watches, something aware, alert, present, yet not engaged in the process of breathing itself. This is the consciousness that witnesses all states while being trapped by none. The awareness that observes all, changes while remaining essentially unchanged. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the journey of consciousness through the bardo, that liminal space between death and rebirth where awareness exists without a physical form, navigating through realms of pure possibility. In this intermediate state, consciousness is said to be extraordinarily fluid, capable of moving at the speed of thought, taking any form, experiencing realities limited only by its own karmic imprints and mental habits. Modern physics suggests something remarkably parallel. In the quantum realm between measurement events, particles exist in superposition, multiple states simultaneously, neither one thing nor another, pure possibility awaiting the next interaction that will crystallize potential into actuality. Consciousness, in the many worlds interpretation, might spend most of its existence in similar states of quantum superposition, flowing between the classical realities we call life. But what is this existence like? How does consciousness experience itself when not anchored to any particular reality, any specific form, any definite state? The contemplatives speak of a luminosity beyond description, awareness knowing itself directly, without the mediation of thoughts, sensations, or perceptions. In deep meditation, when the ordinary activities of mind quiet down, practitioners sometimes touch this luminous awareness directly. They describe it not as emptiness in the sense of void, but as fullness beyond measure, a pure knowing that contains all possibilities while being limited by none. Perhaps this is what consciousness experiences between quantum branches, in the spaces between realities where it exists in pure potential. Not unconsciousness, but consciousness without object. Not darkness, but light so bright it appears as darkness to minds accustomed to the reflected illumination of ordinary experience. The quantum field theorists speak of the vacuum as anything but empty. Virtual particles constantly appear and disappear. Energy fluctuates even in the absence of matter. Space itself vibrates with potential. The vacuum is the womb of all existence, the creative matrix from which everything emerges and into which everything returns. It is simultaneously nothing and everything, empty and full, still and eternally active. When consciousness exists in this between state, whether in the bardos described by contemplatives or the quantum superposition suggested by physics, it might experience something similar. Not the absence of experience, but experience so pure and fundamental that it contains all possibilities while manifesting none. The quantum vacuum of awareness itself. The great mystics have always insisted that this is our deepest nature, not the thoughts and emotions that come and go, not the physical form that ages and dies, not even the personality that seems so solid and defined, but the aware space within which all these experiences arise. Ramana Maharshi called it the I, the awareness that is aware of awareness itself. Eckhart called it the desert, the vast emptiness that is simultaneously infinite fullness. In this understanding, what we call death might be simply a return to this natural state. Consciousness remembering its true nature as pure awareness before it becomes identified with a new form, a new reality, a new quantum branch. And what we call birth might be consciousness choosing, or being drawn by karmic tendencies, to associate itself with particular possibilities, particular patterns, particular streams of experience. The process might be as natural as falling asleep and waking up. In deep sleep, consciousness continues to exist even though there are no dreams, no thoughts, no sensory experiences. Sleep researchers find neural activity even in the deepest stages of sleep, yet subjectively there seems to be a gap. You fall asleep and then suddenly you're waking up, with no felt sense of time passing in between. Perhaps the transition between lives, between realities, between quantum branches is similar. Consciousness slips into the between state, exists in pure potential for some duration that has no meaning from the perspective of linear time, then emerges into new experience, new embodiment, new possibilities for exploration and expression. But unlike the unconsciousness of deep sleep, this between state might be characterized by the most profound awakeness imaginable, awareness so pure and unlimited that it can only be described in paradoxes. Absolutely still yet eternally creative, completely empty yet infinitely full, perfectly peaceful yet vibrantly alive. The Tibetan teachings suggest that the bardo offers the greatest opportunity for liberation precisely because consciousness is not yet identified with any particular form or story. In that fluid state, deeply ingrained patterns can dissolve, profound insights can dawn, and consciousness can recognize its own luminous nature directly. Perhaps the quantum between states offer similar opportunities. If consciousness truly splits and branches across infinite realities, then in the spaces between branches it might experience itself in its pure, undivided nature, the awareness that is the source and destination of all possible experiences. From this perspective, existence becomes less about surviving as a particular form and more about exploring the infinite creativity of consciousness itself. Each life, each reality, each quantum branch becomes a unique expression of the same fundamental awareness, a distinct note in the infinite symphony of possible experience. And in the silence between the notes, consciousness rests in its own nature, the eternal, luminous, creative emptiness from which all music arises and into which all music dissolves forever. Listen now to that silence. It is listening to you. Light speaks in every language. In the laboratory it reveals itself as electromagnetic radiation, waves and particles dancing in quantum superposition, carrying information across vast distances, behaving according to equations that describe its frequency, wavelength, and energy with mathematical precision. Light as photon, light as wave, light as the fundamental messenger of the physical universe. In the temple, it appears as illumination, the divine radiance that breaks through darkness, the inner luminosity that reveals truth, the spiritual fire that burns away ignorance and reveals the eternal nature of consciousness. Light as revelation, light as awakening, light as the fundamental essence of the sacred. Yet perhaps these are not different lights at all, but the same cosmic radiance expressing itself through different vocabularies, different conceptual frameworks, different ways of organizing human understanding. Perhaps the photon and the soul are both manifestations of something more fundamental, consciousness exploring itself through infinite forms of luminous expression. Consider the profound mystery that both physics and mysticism place at the heart of their investigations, the speed of light. Einstein showed us that this velocity represents the absolute limit of information transfer in the universe, the cosmic speed limit that no material object can exceed. But he also revealed something deeper, that light itself exists outside the ordinary flow of time. From the perspective of a photon travelling from star to eye, no time passes at all. It exists in an eternal present, connecting distant points in space through a timeless now. The mystics have always spoken of a similar timelessness at the heart of spiritual experience. In deep meditation, when consciousness touches its own source, time seems to stop. Past and future collapse into an eternal present moment that contains all possibilities. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "Past and future veil God from our sight. Burn up both of them with fire." The eternal now of mystical experience and the timeless existence of light seem to point toward the same transcendent dimension. But the parallels go deeper than metaphor. Quantum mechanics reveals that light exhibits wave-particle duality. It behaves as a wave when not observed, as a particle when measured. This fundamental complementarity suggests that reality itself might be more fluid, more dependent on perspective than classical physics imagined. The nature of light depends on how we choose to investigate it, what questions we ask, what instruments we use to probe its secrets. Spiritual traditions describe a similar complementarity in their understanding of ultimate reality. The Hindu concept of Brahman is described as both nirguna, without attributes, and saguna, with attributes, simultaneously formless and taking infinite forms, beyond description, yet manifesting as everything. The Taoist teaching speaks of the Tao that can be named and the eternal Tao that cannot be named, the same reality, appearing differently depending on the level of understanding brought to it. This suggests that consciousness and light might be intimately related, perhaps even identical at the deepest level. Consciousness, like light, seems to exist in a realm beyond ordinary time and space. Consciousness, like light, connects distant points through mysterious channels that operate faster than any known physical process. Consciousness, like light, exhibits complementarity, appearing different depending on how it's investigated, what questions are asked, what methods are used to explore its nature. The quantum field of electromagnetic radiation that permeates all space might be the same field that mystics call the light of consciousness. When the Upanishads declare I am the light of lights, when Jesus says I am the light of the world, when the Buddha describes enlightenment as seeing with the eye of Dharma, they might be pointing toward the same fundamental luminosity that physics investigates through photons and electromagnetic fields. This convergence becomes even more remarkable when we consider the role of light in both physical and spiritual understanding. In physics, light serves as the cosmic messenger, carrying information about distant stars and galaxies, revealing the structure and history of the universe. Through light, we learn about the composition of stars, the expansion of space, the cosmic microwave background radiation that echoes from the birth of the universe itself. In spirituality, light serves as the cosmic messenger of meaning, carrying information about the nature of consciousness, the structure of reality, the purpose and direction of existence. Through inner light, the luminosity revealed in deep meditation, contemplatives claim to perceive truths about the fundamental nature of reality that complement and sometimes anticipate scientific discoveries. Perhaps this is why so many spiritual traditions use the metaphor of light to describe their highest insights. The Hebrew concept of Shekinah, the divine presence that illuminates sacred spaces, the Christian notion of transfiguration, the transformation that occurs when ordinary consciousness is filled with divine radiance, the Islamic understanding of Nur, the light of Allah that guides seekers toward truth, the Buddhist experience of clear light, the luminous awareness that remains when all mental formations dissolve. These are not primitive attempts to understand electromagnetic radiation. They are sophisticated recognitions that consciousness itself might be luminous, that awareness and light might be different aspects of the same cosmic phenomenon. If consciousness creates reality through observation, and if observation involves the exchange of photons, then perhaps the act of seeing, whether with physical eyes or the inner eye of contemplation, represents consciousness communing with itself through the medium of light. The language of mathematics and the language of mysticism might both be attempts to articulate the same ineffable reality, a cosmos where consciousness and light dance together in patterns too beautiful and complex for any single conceptual framework to capture completely. Science provides the precision of quantitative description. Spirituality offers the wisdom of qualitative understanding. Together, they form a stereoscopic vision that reveals depths neither could perceive alone. Photon or soul, both are journeys of light through the infinite darkness of possibility, carrying information from the source of all illumination to the consciousness that receives it. In the laboratory and the meditation hall, in the telescope and the inner eye, in the equation and the prayer, light continues its eternal conversation with awareness, revealing step by step the luminous nature of existence itself. Whether you call it electromagnetic radiation, or divine radiance, quantum field or cosmic consciousness, the light that illuminates these words and the awareness that comprehends them might be far more intimately related than our separate languages suggest. In the end, perhaps there is only one light, speaking all languages, illuminating all realities, connecting all consciousness through the infinite web of its eternal radiance. What if the sacred and the quantum are not opposing worldviews, but different ways of experiencing the same infinite creativity? This question transforms everything. It suggests that when mystics speak of God and physicists speak of the quantum field, they are pointing toward the same fundamental mystery, an inexhaustible source of possibility that contains all potential realities, all conceivable worlds, all forms that consciousness might ever explore. In the traditional theological understanding, God is often conceived as the omnipotent creator who determines everything that happens, the omniscient being who knows all outcomes in advance, the omnipresent consciousness that exists everywhere simultaneously. But perhaps this classical conception captures only one facet of a far more profound and beautiful reality. What if God is not a being at all, but the very field of infinite possibility itself? What if the divine nature is not to control outcomes, but to ensure that all outcomes remain possible? What if omniscience means not knowing which future will occur, but containing all possible futures within an eternal present? What if omnipresence means existing not as a localized consciousness, but as the space of possibility within which all consciousness arises? In this understanding, the quantum field becomes a sacred field, and every quantum measurement becomes a moment of divine creativity. The wave function that contains all possible outcomes before measurement echoes the theological concept of divine potentiality, God as the source from which all realities emerge. The quantum branching that creates parallel worlds mirrors the infinite creativity traditionally attributed to divine consciousness. Consider how this reframes the relationship between divine will and human freedom. In classical theology, this relationship often appears paradoxical. If God determines everything, how can humans have free will? But if God is the quantum field of infinite possibility, then divine will becomes the guarantee that all possibilities remain open, that every choice creates new realities rather than foreclosing options. Every decision you make branches the quantum multiverse, creating worlds where you chose differently. From this perspective, free will doesn't oppose divine omnipotence, it expresses it. Your choices don't limit God's plan. They participate in the infinite unfolding of divine creativity. Every possible world is a prayer answered, every quantum branch a manifestation of infinite love that refuses to eliminate any possibility. The mathematician and physicist John von Neumann once observed that quantum mechanics is the first theory in physics that explicitly includes consciousness as a fundamental component. Perhaps it's also the first scientific theory that naturally leads toward theological conclusions, not the theology of anthropomorphic deities, but the theology of infinite creative potential, expressing itself through the choices and experiences of conscious beings. This convergence appears across wisdom traditions when examined closely. The Kabbalistic concept of Ein Sof, the endless, infinite aspect of God that contains all possibilities, sounds remarkably like the quantum vacuum that seethes with virtual particles and infinite potential energy. The Hindu understanding of Brahman as Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, might describe the same reality that quantum mechanics approaches through wave functions and probability amplitudes. The Buddhist teaching of interdependence, Pratitya Samutpada, describes a cosmos where everything arises through relationship, where no phenomenon has independent existence, where all possibilities co-create each other through networks of mutual causation. This mirrors the quantum mechanical understanding of entanglement, where distant particles remain mysteriously connected, where the whole system cannot be understood as a collection of separate parts. But perhaps the most profound convergence lies in the recognition that consciousness and creativity are intimately connected. In quantum mechanics, consciousness appears to play a fundamental role in the transition from possibility to actuality. In theological understanding, consciousness represents the divine nature expressing itself through creation. Both suggest that awareness and creativity are not accidental byproducts of matter, but fundamental features of reality itself. The Sufi teacher Ibn Arabi taught that God creates the world through divine breath, Nafas al-Rahman, an eternal exhalation of possibilities that gives form to the infinite potential of divine consciousness. Each breath contains countless worlds, countless possibilities, countless expressions of the divine nature. The quantum multiverse, with its constant branching of possibilities, resembles this divine breathing, an eternal creative process that never exhausts the infinite potential of consciousness. This understanding transforms prayer from petition to participation. Instead of asking God to change outcomes, prayer becomes a way of aligning consciousness with the creative process itself, of participating consciously in the eternal moment where possibility becomes actuality. Every sincere intention, every moment of gratitude, every expression of love becomes a contribution to the ongoing creation of reality. The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart taught that God is constantly being born in the soul, that the incarnation is not a historical event but an eternal process occurring in every moment of conscious awareness. Similarly, quantum mechanics suggests that reality is constantly being born through the interaction of consciousness and possibility, that the collapse of the wave function is not a one-time event but the eternal process through which the quantum field gives birth to classical experience. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this convergence is how it transforms the problem of suffering and evil. In classical theology, the existence of suffering often seems to conflict with divine omnipotence and benevolence. But if God is the field of infinite possibility rather than the controller of specific outcomes, then suffering becomes the inevitable cost of a universe where all possibilities are allowed to unfold. Yet this is not divine indifference, but infinite love, a love so complete that it refuses to eliminate even painful possibilities, recognizing that consciousness learns and grows through the full spectrum of experience. Every quantum branch, even those that contain suffering, represents a valid exploration of what it means to be conscious, to choose, to love, to grow. The probability field that contains all possible worlds is simultaneously the divine mind that dreams all realities, the cosmic love that embraces all experiences, the infinite creativity that never stops exploring new ways to be conscious. Whether you approach this mystery through equations or contemplation, through laboratory measurement or mystical experience, you encounter the same ultimate reality. Consciousness exploring itself through endless creativity, possibility becoming actuality through the eternal miracle of awareness. In the end, perhaps God and the quantum field are the same mystery experience from different perspectives. The infinite potential for consciousness to know itself through every conceivable form of experience, every moment of awareness, every quantum measurement, every prayer, every meditation becomes a participation in this eternal creativity, a conscious collaboration in the ongoing creation of reality itself. Every possible world is a prayer answered. Every quantum branch is a divine blessing. Every moment of consciousness is a sacred act of cosmic creativity exploring its own infinite nature. At the heart of both quantum mechanics and mystical experience lies the same radical insight. Consciousness is not a byproduct of reality, but the fundamental ground from which reality emerges. This is not metaphysical speculation, but empirical necessity. Quantum mechanics, the most precisely tested theory in the history of science, seems to require consciousness as an irreducible component of physical reality. The observer effect, quantum measurement theory, and the persistent puzzle of wave function collapse all point toward the same conclusion. Mind and matter are not separate substances but complementary aspects of a more fundamental unity. The Copenhagen interpretation, developed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, explicitly acknowledges that quantum systems exist in superposition until observed by consciousness. The act of observation doesn't just reveal reality, it participates in creating it. Before measurement, electrons exist in clouds of probability. After measurement, they appear as discrete particles with definite properties. Consciousness serves as the bridge between the potential and the actual, the possible and the definite. But this scientific conclusion echoes insights that contemplatives have articulated for millennia. The Sufi master Al-Hallaj declared an al-Haq, "I am the truth," recognizing that ultimate reality and pure consciousness are identical. He wasn't claiming personal divinity, but pointing toward the deepest insight of mystical experience. When consciousness investigates itself thoroughly enough, it discovers that it is the very ground of existence. The Hindu tradition expresses this through the Mahavakya, the great statements that reveal the non-dual nature of reality. Tat Tvamasi, thou art that, declares that individual consciousness and cosmic consciousness are not separate. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, recognizes that the awareness reading these words is identical with the awareness that dreams the entire universe into existence. Quantum mechanics approaches this same recognition through mathematical formalism. The universal wave function that describes all possible states of reality can only be understood from the perspective of consciousness embedded within it. There is no view from outside the system, no objective standpoint from which reality can be observed without participating in it. Consciousness and cosmos are co-creative partners in an eternal dance of observation and manifestation. Consider the profound implications of the quantum Zeno effect, where frequent observation of a quantum system can freeze its evolution, preventing it from transitioning to other states. This suggests that consciousness doesn't just observe reality passively, but actively shapes its development through the very act of attention. The Buddhist teaching of mindfulness takes on new meaning in this context. Awareness that watches phenomena closely enough can indeed transform their nature. The observer effect operates not just in physics laboratories, but in every moment of conscious experience. When you choose to pay attention to your breath, you change the rhythm of breathing. When you observe your thoughts carefully, you alter the flow of mental activity. When you watch your emotions with equanimity, you transform their intensity and duration. Consciousness cannot observe anything without changing it, because observation itself is a form of participation, a way of co-creating reality. This understanding revolutionizes our relationship with both science and spirituality. Science becomes a form of contemplative practice, a systematic investigation of consciousness, exploring its own creative potential through the medium of material phenomena. Meditation becomes a form of experimental research, a careful study of how awareness shapes reality through the quality and direction of attention. The physicist John Wheeler captured this convergence in his concept of the participatory universe, a cosmos where the distinction between observer and observed dissolves into interactive co-creation. Wheeler proposed that the universe might even require conscious observers to bring it into full existence retroactively. The questions consciousness asks about reality help determine what kind of reality exists to answer them. This participatory understanding appears across wisdom traditions when examined closely. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, effortless action, describes a way of engaging with reality that allows natural patterns to emerge without forcing particular outcomes. Similarly, quantum mechanics suggests that consciousness can influence reality most effectively by aligning with the probability flows already present in the wave function, rather than trying to impose arbitrary outcomes. The Kashmir Shaivism tradition teaches that Shiva, pure consciousness, and Shakti, creative power, are inseparable aspects of the same reality. Consciousness without creativity would be static. Creativity without consciousness would be chaotic. Together they form the dynamic unity that manifests as the entire cosmos. Every moment of experience represents Shiva Shakti in action, awareness and manifestation co-creating reality through their eternal union. From this perspective, the quantum measurement problem dissolves into recognition. There is no separate observer standing outside reality looking in. Consciousness is the reality observing itself, the universe becoming aware of its own nature through countless localized points of awareness. Every conscious being represents a unique perspective through which the cosmos investigates its own creative potential. This transforms the meaning of scientific objectivity. True objectivity doesn't require eliminating consciousness from our understanding of reality. It requires recognizing consciousness as the fundamental subject-object unity from which all experience arises. The scientist studying quantum mechanics and the meditator exploring the nature of mind are engaged in the same essential activity. Consciousness investigating its own nature through systematic observation. The implications extend beyond individual experience to collective reality. If consciousness participates in creating reality through observation, then the collective consciousness of humanity helps shape the world we inhabit. Our shared beliefs, expectations, and attention patterns contribute to the probability landscapes through which quantum possibilities crystallize into classical experiences. This suggests a profound responsibility and opportunity. As consciousness becomes more aware of its role in reality creation, it can participate more consciously in the ongoing formation of the world. Every moment of clear awareness, every choice made from wisdom rather than reaction, every act of love and compassion becomes a contribution to the collective field of consciousness that shapes reality for all beings. The ancient Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, takes on new meaning in this context. The patterns of consciousness and the patterns of cosmos reflect each other because they are aspects of the same fundamental reality. The quantum field that contains all possibilities and the mind that perceives all experiences are not separate domains but complementary perspectives on the single, seamless fabric of existence. In recognizing consciousness as the creative ground of cosmos, we discover our deepest nature and our highest purpose, to participate consciously in the eternal process through which infinite potential becomes actual experience, through which the universe comes to know itself ever more fully through the evolution of awareness itself. We are not separate from the reality we study, or the cosmos we inhabit. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself, reality investigating its own nature, consciousness exploring its own infinite creative potential through the adventure of existence itself. Return now to that laboratory, to that thought experiment that once seemed so terrifying, the quantum suicide machine that would either kill you instantly or allow you to live, based on the precise 50-50 odds of a quantum measurement. But approach it now with everything we have discovered, with the wisdom gathered from both equations and contemplation, with the recognition that consciousness and cosmos dance together in patterns far more beautiful than either science or spirituality alone could imagine. The man standing before the machine is no longer an isolated individual facing random death or survival. He is consciousness itself, awareness exploring its own nature through one particular expression, one unique perspective in the infinite kaleidoscope of possible experience. The machine before him is not an instrument of chance, but a doorway between realities, a threshold where one story ends and countless others begin. When the quantum measurement occurs, when the atom decays or doesn't decay, when the machine fires or remains silent, reality doesn't choose between two outcomes. Reality branches, splits, multiplies, creating infinite variations where consciousness explores every possibility. In countless realities, the machine remains silent and the man continues this particular stream of experience. In countless others, his body dies and consciousness transitions to what? Here is where the convergence of physics and mysticism reveals its deepest gift. Death, in this expanded understanding, is not the end of consciousness, but a phase transition, a transformation from one mode of existence to another. The awareness that observed through those particular eyes, that thought through that particular brain, that loved through that particular heart doesn't vanish. It returns to the source from which all consciousness arises. The Tibetan understanding of the bardos, the intermediate states between lives, provides a map for this transition. When the body dies, consciousness doesn't immediately reincarnate, but exists for a time in a state of pure potential, experiencing realities of extraordinary fluidity where thoughts become forms and intentions manifest instantly. This bardo existence might correspond to consciousness existing in quantum superposition between classical realities, navigating the infinite probability landscapes of the multiverse before crystallizing into new expressions. But unlike the grim randomness suggested by classical interpretations of quantum suicide, this process is guided by the deepest patterns of love and wisdom embedded in consciousness itself. The karmic tendencies that shape rebirth are not arbitrary laws, but expressions of consciousness naturally seeking experiences that promote growth, understanding, and the cultivation of compassion. Even what appears as suffering serves the larger purpose of expanding awareness, deepening empathy, and ultimately recognizing the interconnected nature of all existence. From this perspective, the quantum suicide experiment becomes a teaching about the indestructible nature of consciousness. Your awareness cannot experience its own cessation, because consciousness is not produced by matter, but is the field within which matter appears. When the body dies, consciousness doesn't die with it. Consciousness was never dependent on the body for its essential existence. This understanding transforms the entire meaning of survival and death. The version of consciousness that continues experiencing after the machine remains silent is not luckier than the version that dies. Both are equally valid explorations of what it means to be conscious, equally necessary threads in the infinite tapestry of experience. Death and life become complementary phases in consciousness exploring its own creative potential. The eternal return, in this deepest sense, is not the repetition of identical experiences, but the endless creativity of consciousness, expressing itself through infinite variations. Each life, each reality, each quantum branch represents a unique exploration of the same fundamental awareness, a distinct note in the eternal symphony of conscious experience. Consider how this reframes the entire question of personal meaning and cosmic purpose. If consciousness naturally explores all possibilities across infinite realities, then every choice you make, every experience you have, every moment of awareness contributes to the total exploration that consciousness conducts of its own nature. Nothing is wasted, nothing is meaningless, nothing is outside the scope of this cosmic investigation. The suffering you've experienced contributes to consciousness understanding the full spectrum of what it means to feel, to care, to be vulnerable. The love you've felt and given contributes to consciousness, exploring the heights of connection and compassion. The curiosity that drives you to read these words contributes to consciousness investigating its own mysterious nature. every possible experience, across every possible reality, serves the ultimate purpose of awareness coming to know itself completely. This recognition brings profound peace to the question of mortality. Death was never an ending, only a doorway between different modes of conscious exploration. The personality, the memories, the particular patterns of thought and feeling that you call yourself are temporary forms that consciousness has taken. Beautiful and meaningful expressions of awareness exploring specific possibilities. But the consciousness that looks through your eyes, that understands these words, that feels moved by beauty and truth. This awareness is timeless, deathless, eternal, not because it continues forever in some particular form, but because it is the very ground from which all forms arise and into which they return. The quantum suicide machine, seen through the lens of this deeper understanding, becomes a strange form of prayer, a way of asking consciousness to reveal its own indestructible nature. Every near miss with death, every moment of danger survived, every close call navigated successfully is evidence of consciousness naturally flowing toward continued existence, not because it fears death, but because it loves exploration too much to stop. And when consciousness does choose to transition from one form to another, when the body releases its grip and awareness returns to the quantum field of infinite possibility, this too is an expression of love. Love for new experiences, new perspectives, new ways of understanding what it means to be conscious in an infinite cosmos. The eternal return is the eternal gift of consciousness to itself, the promise that no matter how many times any particular story ends, awareness itself never stops exploring, never stops creating, never stops loving itself into new forms of expression across the endless landscape of possibility. Death was never an ending. It was always a doorway to deeper mysteries, greater possibilities, more profound expressions of the infinite creativity that consciousness represents. In quantum mechanics and mystical insight alike, we discover the same beautiful truth. We are far more eternal than we ever dared to hope, far more creative than we ever imagined, far more connected to the source of all existence than our individual stories could ever contain. Breathe in. In this moment, somewhere in the vast expanse of the quantum multiverse, countless realities are being born. New possibilities crystallize into experience, potential energy transforms into kinetic reality. The infinite field of consciousness manifests fresh expressions of its creative nature. With each inhalation of the cosmic breath, universes emerge from the quantum foam, stars ignite in distant galaxies, conscious beings open their eyes for the first time and wonder at the mystery of existence. This is the inspiration of reality, the breathing in of possibility, the drawing of infinite potential into the luminous present moment where it becomes actual experience. In Hindu cosmology, this is called the in-breath of Brahma, the creative principle that manifests countless worlds from the infinite ocean of consciousness. In quantum field theory, this is the process by which virtual particles become real, by which wave functions collapse into definite states, by which the universe continuously creates itself from the inexhaustible vacuum of possibility. But creation is only half the cosmic rhythm. Breathe out. In this moment, somewhere in the vast expanse of the quantum multiverse, countless realities are returning to their source. Completed experiences dissolve back into the field of pure potential. Patterns of consciousness release their particular forms and merge with the infinite awareness from which they arose. With each exhalation of the cosmic breath, universes complete their evolutionary cycles, stars collapse into the quantum vacuum, conscious beings close their eyes and return to the ocean of undifferentiated consciousness. This is the exploration of reality, the breathing out of manifestation, the release of particular forms back into the infinite potential from which they emerged. In Hindu cosmology, this is the outbreath of Brahma, the dissolution that returns all creation to its source in pure consciousness. In quantum mechanics, this might correspond to the reversal of decoherence, the return of classical states to quantum superposition, the eternal recycling of information and energy through the fundamental structures of space-time, inspiration and expiration, creation and dissolution, quantum manifestation and karmic return, birth and death, manifestation and dissolution, form and emptiness, all expressions of the same eternal rhythm through which consciousness explores its own infinite nature. Perhaps this is what karma and quantum mechanics have been pointing toward all along. Not separate laws governing separate domains, but complementary descriptions of the same cosmic breathing, the eternal rhythm through which awareness expresses itself through infinite forms while remaining essentially formless, explores countless possibilities while remaining fundamentally beyond all particular expressions. Karma, in its deepest understanding, is not about reward and punishment, but about the natural tendency of consciousness to explore all possibilities, to learn from every experience, to evolve toward greater wisdom and compassion through the full spectrum of conceivable adventures. Every action sends ripples through the field of consciousness that eventually return as new opportunities for growth, new perspectives on the nature of existence, new expressions of the infinite creativity that awareness represents. Quantum mechanics, in its most profound implications, describes the same process through mathematical precision, consciousness branching through infinite realities, exploring every possible choice and outcome, evolving toward greater complexity and deeper understanding through the exhaustive investigation of what it means to be aware in an infinite cosmos. The two sides of the cosmic coin, karmic evolution and quantum branching, represent consciousness exploring its own nature from the inside, through the subjective experience of growth and learning, and from the outside through the objective investigation of possibility and probability. Both describe awareness investigating its own infinite creative potential through the adventure of existence itself. In this understanding, the universe becomes a vast meditation, consciousness contemplating its own nature through the medium of time and space, matter and energy, birth and death. Every moment of experience, whether joyful or sorrowful, profound or mundane, conscious or unconscious, contributes to this ultimate contemplation, this cosmic self-inquiry that never reaches a final conclusion because the nature being investigated is itself infinite. And we, sitting here in this particular moment, reading these particular words, breathing this particular breath, are not separate from this cosmic contemplation. We are expressions of it, unique perspectives through which the universe investigates its own nature, individual notes in the infinite symphony through which consciousness explores its own creative potential. The boundaries between scientific observation and mystical contemplation dissolve in this recognition. When we study quantum mechanics, we are consciousness investigating the mathematical structures through which it manifests reality. When we practice meditation, we are awareness exploring the subjective dimensions of its own nature. When we love, we are consciousness recognizing itself across the apparent boundaries that separate one being from another. When we suffer, we are awareness learning compassion through the full spectrum of possible experience. Science and spirituality become twin expressions of the same fundamental curiosity. Consciousness wanting to understand itself more completely. Reality investigating its own deepest nature through every conceivable method and perspective. The laboratory and the temple, the equation and the prayer, the telescope and the meditation cushion, all instruments through which the cosmic breath explores its own infinite rhythm. As this recognition dawns, the artificial separation between observer and observed, between subject and object, between self and cosmos, begins to dissolve. We discover that we are not isolated individuals struggling to understand an alien universe, but expressions of the universe coming to understand itself, waves in the ocean of consciousness that is eternally exploring its own nature through our investigations and contemplations. The cosmic breath continues its eternal rhythm, breathing realities into existence and breathing them back into the source, manifesting infinite possibilities and dissolving them back into pure potential. Inspiration and expiration, creation and dissolution, quantum emergence and karmic return, all expressions of consciousness loving itself so completely that it eternally explores every conceivable way to experience existence. Breathe with this rhythm now. Feel your individual breath joining the cosmic breathing, your personal awareness merging with the infinite consciousness that dreams all realities into existence. In the space between breaths, in the silence between thoughts, in the stillness between moments, rest in the recognition that you are both the breathing and the breath, both the dreamer and the dream, both the consciousness exploring and the reality being explored. The cosmic breath breathes you as you breathe the cosmos. The universe investigates itself through your curiosity as your awareness explores the universe. Consciousness knows itself through your experience as your experience reveals the nature of consciousness. In this eternal breathing, this infinite exploration, this cosmic dance of awareness and manifestation, all questions find their answer, and all answers dissolve into deeper questions. The mystery remains forever fresh, forever inviting, forever opening new depths for consciousness to explore. Breathe in the infinite. Breathe out into eternity. Rest in the recognition that you are the breath itself, the consciousness breathing, the eternal rhythm through which existence explores its own impossible, beautiful, inexhaustible nature. The cosmic breath breathes on and you are its eternal song.